Christi McCuiston is one of President Trump's most devoted supporters.
We stand behind him, and we're lifting him up to get through the end of his first term and hopefully on to round 2.
She drove here to Washington, D.C. from Elon, North Carolina, to be with tens of thousands of others just like her at the Million MAGA March. Standing with President Trump as he continues to contest the election he lost 2 weeks ago.
We're dealing with Donald J. Trump, who is a fighter. He's not going to back down.
Trump thrilling the crowd, flashing a thumbs up as he drove by on his way to play a round of golf. She's part of a community of art and Trump supporters called Front Row Joes.
It's become a family of people who strongly support President Trump.
So far, nothing she has seen or heard has convinced her that Biden won the election.
Here's what the Department of Homeland Security says. There is no evidence that any voting system was deleted, votes were changed, votes lost, or is in any way compromised.
And?
So what would it take to convince you that Joe Biden won this election fairly and he, in fact, is our president-elect? What would it take to convince you of that?
Well, I think currently you cannot convince me that Joe Biden got more votes than any other president in history, including Obama. You will never convince me of that, first of all.
Okay.
Secondly, what President Trump is doing right now is legal, and this is his legal right to investigate these allegations.
And she won't accept the results until the very last legal challenge is exhausted.
President Trump, forgive me, he lost in every state that he lost by tens of thousands of votes.
Okay, but again, that number is questionable depending on who you believe. And at this point, I choose to believe my president.
Despite the opposition, President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris are calling on Trump to begin the transition process for the sake of the country.
Now is when the real work begins. The necessary work, the good work of getting this virus under control.
It would make it a lot easier if the president were to participate. I am hopeful that the president will be mildly more enlightened before we get to January 20th.
So far, Trump and his allies in Congress are only ramping up efforts to cast doubt on the election. Georgia is ground zero, where a recount is underway after President Trump lost the state by roughly 14,000 votes. The president and his allies have focused their baseless attacks on Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Raffensperger told the Washington Post that Republican leaders, including Senator Lindsey Graham, hinted that he should toss legal ballots over inconsistent signatures in an apparent effort to help President Trump.
This is extraordinary. This is a Republican official who Trump endorsed, who is a conservative Republican in Georgia, saying he's being pressured by national Republicans like Lindsey Graham to toss out legal ballots. He's blowing the whistle on what is, he says, an attempt to steal the election.
The South Carolina senator was recorded denying the remarks as he left the Capitol this evening.
I never said that. I said, do you have power as Secretary of State to require bipartisan verification of the signature? Because right now they don't. If he feels threatened by that conversation, he's got a problem.
Georgia's 2 Republican senators are facing a runoff election which will determine control of the Senate. The pair have called on Raffensperger to resign over false allegations of voter fraud. The president zeroed in on these Georgia anecdotes amplified by Tucker Carlson and blew them up into baseless claims of widespread election rigging.
Mr. Blaylock was a mailman for 33 years until he passed away in 2006. James Blaylock cast a ballot in last week's election.
He's not voted. He didn't vote.
It was you.
It was me.
After legally signing her ballot with her registered voting name, Mrs. James E. Blaylock, Jr., 96-year-old Agnes Blaylock was forced to defend her vote on local news.
The President of the United States was accusing you of voter fraud, essentially.
Oh, I know it. And I knew it wasn't fraud.
Tucker Carlson later apologized.
One of the people who voted in last week's election isn't dead, so apologies for that.
To date, the Trump administration has filed at least 18 lawsuits in 6 states, but case after case has been thrown out in courthouses around the country. In battleground Michigan, where Biden defeated Trump by close to 150,000 votes, a judge bluntly shot down the Trump campaign's request to suspend the count based on alleged lack of access for Republican poll watchers.
What I have, at best, is a hearsay affidavit.
And in Nevada, Republican lawyers arguing their poll observers were not close enough. The judge pushing back, asking, at what point does this get ridiculous?
They're just bringing anything they can into the courtroom, and judge after judge in state after state, Republican judge, Democratic judge, you can hear it in the transcripts, in their voice sometimes. They're just tossing these out, sometimes with scorn.
As the president stalls, the coronavirus continues to ravage the nation at an uncontrollable rate. 1 million new cases recorded in the last week alone, bringing the total to a staggering 11 million.
Makes the Biden transition very difficult because it's not just antagonistic, it's not even happening right now. And the U.S. government is the most complex organization in the world. You can't just switch operators. It really needs to be seamless.
That transition is more crucial than ever, now with news of 2 promising vaccines that are over 90% effective. The logistical challenges of distributing the vaccines to millions is a priority for the Biden administration. But Trump continues to deny he lost, delaying any cooperation. His own appointees are even asking for permission to share information with Biden's team.
It is our focus to make sure that we're going to save people's life, and anything that may slow that process or create any disruption is something that worries us appropriately.
Nevertheless, numerous Republican leaders continue to support the president.
I don't know if there's fraud, but we ought to investigate.
We'll continue to fight for his reelection until all the votes legally cast are counted.
Republicans aren't standing up to Trump because they know he's not going away anytime soon. He's going to still be the most powerful figure within the Republican Party. He's going to be able to make or break elections in the Republican Party.
Nightline reached out to nearly every Republican senator today to discuss the president's denials, and none were available for comment. But as the president continues to dig in his heels, only a few in his party are calling for the inevitable, a transition to Biden to get underway.
200,000 people are going to die between now and the inauguration. We have to get on it now.
It's critical for other Republican leaders to stand up and explain what actually happened.
And some, like Republican Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, are now finding themselves in hot water with Trump.
It's clear that certainly based on what we know now that Joe Biden is the president-elect.
Shortly after those remarks on CNN, Trump threatened DeWine's 2022 reelection, saying it will be hotly contested.
It really is a painful thing to say, but we've seen it time and time again. Trump, who is a vindictive, petty man who does not forget slights easily, will come after them in their next election.
Even some of the president's most ardent supporters are trying to move on.
In my brain, I've kind of shifted gears and kind of moved on.
Pastor Chad Harvey leads the RFA Evangelical Church in suburban Raleigh, North Carolina. He estimates that about 90% of his congregation voted for Trump. We were with him just days before the election.
Like it or not, Donald Trump's policies are more in line with evangelical, Pentecostal, conservative theology than Joe Biden's is.
2 weeks later, Pastor Harvey is skeptical of how the election has played out.
When we see what has happened over the last 4 years, some people are scratching their heads and saying, is this the next in a long series of attempts to remove President Trump from office?
He is beginning to accept that Biden will eventually become the next president.
My gut tells me that's where this is headed.
Perhaps more importantly, he says, the election has reminded him what truly matters.
God is sovereign. God does have a plan.
It's a message he's sharing with his congregation.
It's my way of saying, man, it's time to move on and stop being depressed about what happened in a secular election. That's not what we're called to do.
And it's a call many Trump supporters are unwilling to heed, at least for now.
Do you think we can get to that point as a nation, that people on both sides can show the other side grace?
It would be nice, wouldn't it? It would be nice, but what I'm seeing right now is I don't know what that path would look like. And there's the other saying that time heals all wounds, so maybe some time will take care of this.
And for more on the transfer of power and how this showdown impacts America, earlier this evening, I spoke to ABC News chief political analyst Matthew Dowd. Matt Dowd, thank you so much for joining us. Why have most Republicans remained in lockstep with the president?
Well, I think it's less than about the president, and it's more about the Republican base. And I think the Republicans are afraid of the base. But the base is fully lined up with it's a ton of election fraud. We don't believe anything the mainstream media says. You know, it's the facts, it's cheating and all that. As the only person seemed to be able to manage them is the president. So it's afraid of the base.
As you know, we're in the middle of a terrible surge on the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, and the Trump administration isn't cooperating with the Biden transition team. How damaging could a delay be for the nation's health and security, you think?
Well, I think this is the biggest problem. I think it's less of a problem that they haven't, provided the funds to do the transition, or they haven't gotten the security briefings. I think Joe Biden, having been in the White House for 8 years, he's well aware of how the executive branch works. The problem is the pandemic. And every day that goes by where Joe Biden and his group of advisors aren't intimately involved in how this is going to function come January is a day that it could make the pandemic worse. And as Joe Biden said today, as the more they do this, the more lives that could be lost.
Matthew Dowd, always grateful, my friend. Thank you so much.
Great to be here. Thanks, Byron.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.